The 1990s were a decade when one number could sell an entire machine. 16-bit, 32-bit, 64-bit. The number had become the message, but Apple arrived with something far more complicated. A beige multimedia box that wanted to be a game console, a Macintosh, an internet appliance, and your family's personal doorway to the future. It cost nearly $600, came with a controller shaped like a boomerang, and carried one of the most powerful names in technology. Yet most people never saw one, let alone played one. Stranger still, the Apple Pippin was not really an Apple console at all. That contradiction explains both why it existed and why it disappeared, but the most important mistake came before the machine even reached store shelves. This is the complete history of the Pippin, Apple's first, last, and only attempt to enter the console wars. To understand the Pippin, you have to remember what Apple looked like before the iMac, the iPod, and the black turtleneck became corporate mythology. By the early 1990s, the Macintosh had changed personal computing, but Apple itself was struggling. Its computers were expensive, Microsoft Windows was spreading everywhere, and Apple's product line was becoming a jungle of confusing names and overlapping hardware. The company needed a way to push Macintosh technology beyond the traditional computer market, so it developed a new strategy. Instead of building every device itself, Apple would create a standardized multimedia platform and license it to other manufacturers. Think of it less like the PlayStation and more like VHS. Apple would provide the core design and operating system, but different companies could build their own Pippin-compatible machines. The name came from the Newtown Pippin, a type of apple, because apparently naming everything after fruit still left plenty of room for expansion. Apple began developing the platform around 1994. At its heart was Macintosh technology stripped down and reshaped for the living room. The Pippin used a 66 MHz PowerPC 603 processor, included 6 MB of combined memory, and read software from a 4-speed CD-ROM drive. It could display resolutions up to 640 by 480, produce 16-bit stereo sound, and connect to a television or computer monitor. That sounds modest now, but this was respectable hardware for the mid-1990s. The original PlayStation used a roughly 33 MHz processor, while the Sega Saturn relied on its notoriously complex collection of chips. Raw clock speed never tells the whole story, of course, but Pippin was not some powerless electronic potato. Its controller was called the Applejack. It had 4 main face buttons, shoulder controls, and a trackball in the center, allowing it to function as both a gamepad and a mouse. It looks strange, but the design made sense because Pippin's software was supposed to include games, educational programs, web content, and productivity tools. Wait, productivity tools on your game console? Oh yes, the 1990s loved that idea. Every company wanted to sell your family a magical box that would play games, teach the children, balance the household budget, access an encyclopedia, and somehow make dad understand the internet. But Apple did not want to manufacture this magical box itself, so it needed a partner. That partner was Bandai. Bandai was already one of Japan's largest toy companies, with franchises including Gundam, Dragon Ball, and Power Rangers under its enormous entertainment umbrella. The company saw interactive multimedia as the next major market, but creating a console from scratch was expensive and risky. Licensing Apple's platform offered a shortcut. Apple supplied the Pippin architecture and software tools, while Bandai handled manufacturing, marketing, distribution, and most of the financial risk. For Apple, it looked brilliant. The company could expand the Macintosh ecosystem without spending billions to fight Sony, Sega, and Nintendo directly. But there was a problem. Bandai wanted an affordable entertainment machine. Apple's technology came from premium personal computers. So before the first unit had even launched, Pippin was trapped between two worlds. Too limited to replace a Macintosh, but too expensive to compete as a console. Bandai introduced its Japanese model as the Pippin Atmark, releasing it in March 1996 for 64,800 yen. Its white casing looked more like a compact Macintosh accessory than a toy, and Bandai promoted it as a complete digital lifestyle machine. Games were part of the pitch, but so were multimedia encyclopedias, educational discs, animation software, and online communication. The operating system was a modified version of Macintosh System 7 loaded directly from each CD. That gave developers familiar tools and allowed every disk to include the precise system files it required. It also meant the machine did not need a traditional internal hard drive. Elegant? Absolutely. Consumer-friendly? Well, that depended on whether consumers wanted to understand why their console was booting an operating system from a CD. The Japanese software library leaned heavily into Bandai's licenses. There were Gundam titles, Dragon Ball material, anime databases, creative programs, and educational releases. Racing Days offered polygonal driving, while Power Rangers Zeo Full Tilt Battle Pinball delivered exactly the glorious pile of 1990s words promised by its name. But Pippin lacked the one thing every console desperately needs: a killer game. There was no Super Mario 64, no Ridge Racer, no Sonic, no Tekken. Instead, shelves filled with software that often felt like enhanced CD-ROM content from a school computer lab. Some releases were interesting and technically ambitious, but buying a console is emotional. You imagine the nights you will spend with it. Pippin asked you to imagine checking email with a trackball. Bandai still pushed forward. In late 1996, it launched the American version as the Pippin at World. The package included a modem, internet software, the Applejack controller, and access to an online service. Its advertising essentially promised the power of the internet without the complexity of owning a computer. That sounds surprisingly modern. Today, consoles stream movies, run apps, browse stores, and connect entire communities. Pippin understood that the living room machine would become more than a game player. It simply understood it about 10 years too early. The American price was $599 in 1996. The Sega Saturn had also fallen to $199, and Nintendo launched the Nintendo 64 at $199 that September. For the price of one Pippin, you could almost buy all three major consoles, though explaining that purchase to your family might require legal representation. Its timing was brutal. PlayStation offered flashy 3D games and aggressive marketing. Nintendo had Mario. PCs offered a fuller internet experience, local storage, expandable hardware, and thousands of programs. Pippin sat awkwardly in the middle, offering a weaker version of computing at a luxury console price. Even the internet features could not rescue it, 4 kilobits per second, so the promised information superhighway sometimes felt more like watching a JPEG crawl through a drinking straw. The web was also still rough, slow, and unfamiliar to mainstream households. Bandai was selling tomorrow, but consumers were still trying to work out why their phone made demonic noises whenever someone went online. Another licensee, Katz Media, planned a European-focused Pippin system called the KMP-2000. Rather than target children and console players, Katz aimed at hotels, businesses, and specialized markets. But this only made the platform's identity more confusing. Was Pippin a game console, a cheap computer, an internet terminal, or a corporate presentation box? The answer was yes, and that was exactly the problem. A platform needs developers, but developers need customers, and customers need software before they buy the platform. Pippin entered that vicious circle with almost no momentum. Its Macintosh Foundation made ports theoretically easier, but its tiny audience gave studios little reason to spend money producing them. Bandai reportedly manufactured around 100,000 units, but only roughly 42,000 were sold across its short commercial life. Exact Pippin numbers are notoriously iffy, with different sources separating shipments, production, and sell-through in different ways. Whatever figure you accept, it was nowhere near enough. Sony sold millions of PlayStations in the same period. Pippin was not losing the console war. Most players did not even know it had enlisted, and this is where the contradiction at the beginning becomes fatal. Pippin's worst mistake was not simply its $599 price. The price was a symptom of something deeper. No single company controlled the entire experience. Consoles succeed through ruthless coordination. Hardware, price, games, marketing, and launch timing must move together. Sony could cut the PlayStation's price and support the games that justified buying it. Nintendo could build an entire launch around Mario. But with Pippin, Apple defined the technology while Bandai had to turn it into a product, sell it, and absorb most of the risk. Each company held part of the machine, but neither held the whole strategy. That division mattered because every weakness reinforced the next. The premium hardware pushed up the price, so fewer people bought it. The tiny audience discouraged developers, so the software library stayed weak. The weak library made the price look even worse, so sales fell further. Pippin was not killed by one catastrophic decision. It was caught in a loop its own structure made almost impossible to break. Apple's wider problems made matters worse. By 1997, Steve Jobs had returned to a company reportedly close to collapse. Apple began cutting products, canceling side projects, and simplifying its strategy. The sprawling licensing experiments had to go, and Pippin was an obvious casualty. Bandai discontinued the system, Katz Media's plans faded, and Apple ended support for the platform. Pippin had lasted barely more than a year as an active consumer product. Its commercial run was short, its sales were tiny, and its library remained dominated by multimedia curiosities rather than essential games. On paper it was a failure. A spectacular one, but I cannot completely laugh at it, because beneath the beige plastic was a remarkably accurate prediction. Pippin imagined a living room device built around downloadable information, online communication, multimedia entertainment, and software delivered through a unified digital platform. That is basically every modern console, smart television, streaming box, and tablet mashed together. The machine was not wrong about where technology was going. It was wrong about how quickly ordinary people would arrive there, how much they would pay, and what would convince them to make the journey. People did not want an abstract multimedia future. They wanted Crash Bandicoot, Mario Kart 64, and Tekken 2. Sometimes one unforgettable game is worth more than an entire digital lifestyle strategy. Apple never returned to dedicated console hardware, but gaming never fully left Apple. Macs received games, the iPod experimented with them, and the iPhone eventually transformed the entire industry through the App Store. Apple Arcade later offered a subscription library across phones, tablets, Macs, and televisions. The company finally built the broad gaming ecosystem Pippin had dreamed about, but it did so without placing a beige $600 box beneath your television. Today, surviving Pippin systems are treasured by collectors precisely because they represent such a strange alternate history. Hold one, and you are not holding the ancestor of the PlayStation or Xbox. You are holding a future that arrived in the wrong shape, at the wrong price, from companies that never agreed on what it was supposed to become. And maybe that is why the Pippin remains so fascinating. The successful consoles show us where gaming went, but failures like this show us all the weird, hopeful places it could have gone. Would you have wanted a Pippin in 1996? Or would that $599 price have sent you straight back to PlayStation, Saturn, or Nintendo 64? Share your memories in the comments, and if you enjoy exploring the brilliant, bizarre, and sometimes beautifully doomed machines of gaming history, subscribe and join us for the next one.